class, this is Dr. McGonigal with another lecture for your Research Methods 2 class. Today we are going to talk about applying theory to create hypotheses. So in this module, you will learn more about reading research articles, so we'll pick up where we left off last time. And we'll talk about theory, specifically what theory is and how we can use it to inform our research studies. In terms of reading research articles, this is some information that has been adapted from information by Jennifer Raff, and you can see the full information using the link provided at the top of the screen. As a note, before you read an article, you should ask yourself, is this a scholarly article? Is it a research study? Is it a scholarly publication in a peer-reviewed journal? If it's not, then you should stop because it's not relevant to the papers for this class. Also ask yourself, is the topic of the article relevant to your project? You can get a sense of this from the title and the abstract of the article. If no, you should put it aside and keep searching. So once you find articles that are relevant to your paper number 1, you are ready to read them. And here are some tips for reading articles. So first, it may help to take a few passes at reading it first. So skim it to get the big picture and then do a closer read of the article. Let's talk specifically about reading the introduction. And this should be helpful to you as well in terms of writing your introduction, which is essentially your paper number 1. First of all, you want to be taking notes when you're reading. So see if you can state the overall question or problem that the researchers are addressing in the article. So not necessarily the specific hypotheses, but more generally, what is the overall broad question or problem that they're addressing? You then want to summarize the background in about 5 sentences or less, answering the following: what has already been done to answer this question? This will appear in the literature review part of the author's article. Next, what are the limitations of that previous research? What has been some of the limitations that the authors are addressing in their current article? What is the point of this specific study? And what is the contribution that this specific study is making over other previous studies? So you'll see that the authors in the articles that you're reading are making a case for why you should pay attention to their article. Why is their study important? Is it making a contribution above other studies that have already been published? Next, you want to identify the study constructs and state how the researchers define those key constructs. Remember that we talked about a construct being a representation of something that is not tangible, but that exists in psychology. For instance, like intelligence. We know that the construct of intelligence exists. We can't necessarily measure it directly, so we use other measures to get at it. Next, explain the theory being used and or the logical argument that is being made. So the authors, when they're creating their hypotheses, they use what we call theory. They build an argument, a logical argument on the basis of existing theory and previous research to make the argument for their hypotheses. Next, you state the specific questions the authors are trying to answer with their specific study, and oftentimes it's helpful to draw a diagram. There may be a diagram included in your study, but if not, you can also draw one for yourself. Continuing on to the method section. When you're reading the method section, you want to identify the research method used. So is it experimental? Is it non-experimental? What type of experimental or non-experimental study is it? And based on your knowledge from Research Methods 1 and our review previously, what are some of the pros and cons or limitations of the type of method that they used in light of what they're trying to study? So you want to look back at your notes and your readings on that method if you need to, remind yourself, and consider the pros and cons for answering that specific research question. Ask yourself, how are each of the variables operationalized? So remember that operationalizing means that that's how we assess or we measure a variable. Are there any issues with it? So if I say, for instance, that I'm studying intelligence, but then I use a measure that is not a good measure of intelligence, then there's an issue with that, right? So think about that when you're reading your articles. Next, what was the sample that was used? Who are the participants? What are the pros and cons of using that particular sample? Was the sample size appropriate for the study? If you're studying college students, then you expect that the authors of the study are going to include college students in their sample and not other individuals. Next, moving on to the results section. So you want to summarize the study results. In other words, did the researchers find support for their hypotheses? Don't write the numbers down, write what they mean. So remember we talked about last time how p of less than 0.05 indicates statistical significance. So usually statistical significance indicates support for a hypothesis. So write that down. Also, did the authors use appropriate statistics to test their hypotheses? You might not be at a point in the semester right now where you're able to assess that, but you will be later on when we cover different types of statistics. Next, read the discussion section. How do the findings extend our understanding of the big question you identified when reading the introduction? So remember, when you read the introduction, you picked out the overall problem or question. So how did their findings extend our understanding of that overall broad problem or question? Next, how do the findings inform theory? So each time we do a psychological study, a deductive psychological study, we are helping our understanding of a theory. And sometimes our findings support the theory. Sometimes they go against the theory. Sometimes they add a piece to the theory that wasn't previously examined. So we talk about that in our discussion section. And so you can ask yourself that when you're reading your articles. Next, what are the practical implications of the findings? Do the findings have implications for people in their day-to-day lives? Do they have implications, for instance, for how we run schools, how we manage the criminal justice system, how we run organizations, how we manage people in organizations? Next, does the author's interpretation of their findings fit with your interpretation of the findings? So do you have a different interpretation? Think about that critically. All right, so let's review what is a theory. This is also covered in detail in the chapters that you read in your Price online textbook. A theory is a framework for organizing ideas. So Price provides a definition that a theory is a coherent explanation or interpretation of one or more phenomena. So we use theories in psychological research to help us understand and organize what we're seeing in the world. So a theory can take a collection of observations and explain them in a coherent, what we call parsimonious, which means brief and as not complicated as possible, format. So Price goes on to say that although theories can take a variety of forms, one thing that they have in common is that they go beyond the phenomena they explain by including variables, structures, processes, functions, or organizing principles that have not been observed directly. What Price is saying there is that it's not just explaining one particular thing at hand. So a theory is not about explaining one person, one situation, one group of people. A theory is a broader framework that can be applied to understanding a variety of different situations, people, populations, things like that. In that way, like I said, theories help with us understanding and organizing the scientific knowledge in psychology. Like I said earlier, theories are not specific to one example. They have broader use in explaining or interpreting multiple phenomena. It's important to note that different theories may contradict each other, and that's okay. The purpose of psychological research is to advance understanding and get closer to the truth. So we may find support for one theory and not support for another theory. And our study is just one piece in the broader understanding of how society works and how everything fits together. Theories can almost never be proven correct. So one common pitfall that I see students making in this class is saying that because they found support for their hypothesis, that they proved their theory correct. This is actually not true. We can never prove that a theory is correct. What we do in research is we seek evidence to support a theory or that doesn't support a theory. And that's just one piece of the puzzle that contributes to our understanding of that theory. But there's not one particular study that could possibly test everything related to a theory and find that it's true or not true. One example of a theory that has essentially been taken as proof is the theory of gravity, right? So we have a lot of evidence to suggest that gravity exists in the way that it does. However, especially in psychological science, we don't have any theories that we know are proven. We do have theories that have a lot of support, and so we take them as being kind of reputable theories, and those are the types of theories I hope you use this semester, but they're not proven correct. How do we use theory? So again, just a reminder to read the Price chapters. There are two main ways in psychological research. So number one, we observe a phenomenon, we offer a theory to explain it, which is inductive research. And number two, we use existing theory to derive a hypothesis to test in our studies. This is deductive. So deductive research takes existing theory and uses it to help us understand what the likely outcome of our study will be. Whereas inductive research is when an individual observes existing phenomena in reality and then tries to come up with a theory to explain why that's happening. So as we discussed in our methods review lecture, we are focusing on a deductive approach in this class. Let's talk about an example of a psychological theory. The diagram that you see here represents the theory of planned behavior. And I will talk through this theory just briefly with you, and if you would like some more information on the theory of planned behavior, I suggest that you go ahead and watch that YouTube link that's provided in the bottom right of your screen. The theory of planned behavior is a theory that talks about why people behave in the way that they do. So remember how behavior is a key aspect of psychological research. So you can see over toward the right-hand side of the screen here, we have behavior. The circle is representing human behavior. Now, if we take a step back, we can look at what is leading up to a human's behavior. So in this circle in the middle, we have what we call intention or behavioral intention. And what this is saying is that if a person intends or means to act in a certain way or behave in a certain way, they in fact will behave in a certain way. So that's why we see the circle with intention having an arrow leading to behavior. Now let's take a step back further. What leads to intentions? Well, the theory of planned behavior states that what leads to intentions can be categorized into three categories here. The first is attitudes. So this would say that our attitudes about something would predict our intentions to engage in that something. Let's take the example of exercise. So what is your attitude about exercising? Your attitude is, do you generally like it? Do you generally not like it? What do you feel about exercise, or what do you think about exercise? So that attitude is going to inform or lead to our intentions to engage in exercise, and that in turn will inform or lead to our actual behaviors of exercise. The next of the three is subjective norms. And what this is referring to is the word subjective means how you interpret it or how I interpret it. And the norms are social norms or things that exist in our social networks. So in other words, if I perceive or I think that my friends, all of my close friends, are exercising a lot, maybe I see them out jogging, maybe I am doing yoga videos with them together, my subjective norm is going to be that people generally do exercise, and that's the norm. According to the theory of planned behavior, this norm would then inform my personal intention to engage in exercise, and that would in turn inform my actual exercise behaviors. The third piece is perceived behavioral control. So what this is referring to is the amount of control that I think I have over my behavior. So let's use the example of the pandemic and coronavirus. Perhaps before the coronavirus existed, I had perceived that I had a lot of behavioral control, that I could exercise anytime I wanted to because I could go to the campus gym. And then after the pandemic and perhaps the campus gym closed, I perceived that I couldn't go there anymore. Maybe I had more responsibilities at home in terms of my family. Maybe my work hours got increased. Therefore, I'm going to perceive that I don't have a lot of control over my ability to do exercise behaviors. That in turn will lead to a lower intention to exercise, and that in turn will lead to a lower engagement in exercise behaviors. So you can see that the theory of planned behavior basically says that these three things together, all of them, predict our intentions to engage in a behavior and in turn our actual behaviors. So I want you to apply this to your own exercise behavior. So you can think about your answers to the following. If it helps, you can write them down, otherwise just think about them. Number 1, describe your attitudes toward exercising. Number 2, describe the norms for exercising that you observe. So in your social group, do other people exercise a lot? In your family? Number 3, describe your level of perceived behavioral control. How much control do you think you have over your ability to exercise right now? High, moderate, or low? And then number 4, the theory of planned behavior would say that your answers to number 1, number 2, and number 3 will influence your intentions to exercise and in turn your actual exercise behaviors. So go ahead and pause the video now if you'd like to complete that activity. Okay, so let's apply the theory of planned behavior to a research topic. And this is intended to give you an example of what you will be working on soon for your project number 1. So let's say that my research topic is excessive alcohol drinking in college students. I'm interested in that. I want to understand what causes it. So my research question could be, what causes some college students to drink excessively? The theory that I could use is the theory of planned behavior. Now, why is that an appropriate theory for my research question? Well, it is because drinking is a behavior, right? So if I'm trying to understand a behavior, I need a theory that's going to help me understand a behavior. So the theory of planned behavior is relevant there. I should note that it may or may not be relevant to your particular research question. So if you're not studying a behavior, then this theory will not be relevant to you. Okay, so according to the theory of planned behavior, I can understand that, I can read about it, and then I can come up with my hypotheses because I can derive them on the basis of what the theory would say. So my hypothesis 1 could be that positive attitudes about alcohol will relate to more excessive drinking in college students. So if people have an attitude that they enjoy alcohol, that they are positive about it, they in turn will have more intentions to drink and more actual drinking behaviors. Hypothesis 2, college students with more close friends who drink excessively will also drink more excessively. So what do you think that corresponds to in the theory of planned behavior? So it actually corresponds to the subjective norms. Remember, I talked about norms as being social in nature. So if you have more friends who drink excessively, according to this theory, you're more likely to intend to and actually drink excessively. Hypothesis 3 is that self-efficacy for refusing drinks in social situations will negatively relate to excessive drinking. What does that correspond to in the theory of planned behavior? That corresponds to perceived behavioral control. Self-efficacy is the degree of confidence that you have in enacting a certain behavior. So if I am confident that I can refuse a drink, that in turn, according to this theory, will negatively predict my excessive drinking. I'd be less likely to drink excessively. So going along with my research topic, my research question, my theory, and my hypotheses, my predictor variables will be first, attitudes about alcohol, second, number of friends who drink excessively, and third, self-efficacy for refusing drinks in social situations. Those are what we call predictors of our behavior that we're interested in, which is excessive alcohol consumption. So my outcome variable in this case is excessive alcohol consumption. Here's another example of a research question where we're applying theory to come up with our hypotheses. So here are some examples. Why do some people continue to smoke even when they have serious health problems? How can we help people to quit smoking? This is another example of research question that's focused on behavior, right? So smoking is a behavior. I might look at cognitive dissonance theory. This theory states that discomfort arises when people have two beliefs that are incompatible in some way. For instance, smoking is harmful, but I continue to do it. So if somebody is realizing that smoking is harmful and they continue to smoke, they might experience what we call cognitive dissonance, and this is like a discomfort because they know that it's bad, but they also know that they continue to do it. With cognitive dissonance, people seek ways to justify behavior that is inconsistent or dissonant. So for example, they might justify it by saying, I have to smoke or I'll get headaches, or smoking is not the cause of my health problem. So they might deny it. So we may further research then what helps reduce cognitive dissonance. So now that we've identified that cognitive dissonance is part of the problem in terms of smoking, we can look at what helps reduce cognitive dissonance in order to inform our hypotheses. So we might find, for example, that psychotherapy is helpful in reducing cognitive dissonance. So we could incorporate references on psychotherapy reducing cognitive dissonance to justify some hypotheses that we'll come up with. This all leads up to our hypothesis justified by research and theory in smoking behavior, cognitive dissonance, and psychotherapy. So this is all the result of the research that we've done in terms of our literature search. Our hypothesis is that psychotherapy will help reduce smoking behavior in individuals who continue to smoke despite recognizing that it can be harmful. Why do we hypothesize this? Well, we make the logical connection between psychotherapy and cognitive dissonance and smoking behavior in our introduction section. We talk about that, we talk about the research in those areas, and that all leads up to the end of our introduction section, which includes our hypothesis. All right, so think about these questions. Have you encountered any theories in your literature search so far? So hopefully you've been doing your literature search so far this week or last week. Which theories have you encountered? Do these theories make sense? Can you use them in your own study? Also, what questions do you have about theories and using theories in your papers? Write down your questions and email them to me, or ask them during your meeting with me this week. So you have an assignment on understanding theory and reading research articles this week. So now the video is over and you should go ahead and complete that assignment on theory.